Alright, so I gushed a lot in at least one previous episode. Was it just one episode or two? I don't remember at this point. Anyway, point is, I gushed in the past about how much I loved the Trollhunters show. It's not a flawless show, and it's never been a flawless show, but I've always really enjoyed it, at least since I started watching it. It's safe to say that I was hugely looking forward to the third and final season of this particular tale of Arcadia. So you can imagine how bummed out I was when this season actually really disappointed me. Now, I want to preface this entire review by saying that I didn't hate it. I still quite enjoyed most of it. There were just some things about it that really bugged me. Some things about it that I feel just fell completely flat and I think maybe even ruined the entire tone and message of the show. And so that's why I want to preface this review by saying that I still think it was a solid season of television. The characters were still a lot of fun. I still really liked seeing them struggle and overcome their struggles. The main character, Jim, is still a fantastic hero. His supporting cast was still great. I need to say all of those things. I need to say that if you haven't seen this final season yet, but you like the other ones, you still should see it, because this review is mostly going to focus on negative stuff. I'm going to start by talking about the things that didn't bother me as much, things that I just feel fell flatter than they probably could have, and then I'm going to spend most of the rest of the review talking about the one thing about this season that really bothered me. Like, as I'm going, if I think of something that's not in my notes here that is good, that's noteworthy and good, I will talk about that, but most of the rest of this review is going to focus on things that I didn't like, so just keep in mind, it's still a good season, for the most part. It's still worth watching if you like this show and haven't seen it yet. And it's not as if the things that I'm going to be talking about, the negatives that I'm going to be talking about, don't have positives to them as well. Like, the first thing that kind of bothered me about this season was Claire's storyline. At the end of last season, Claire was possessed by the spirit of Morgana, who, just for a reminder, is kind of like Gunmar's boss and the ultimate baddie of the entire franchise, at least up to this point. Claire becomes possessed by her through the Shadow Staff, and it's heavily implied, just because of how much weight this event holds, that this is something that's going to be resolved along with everything else that has to be resolved. That it's going to be like a series climax resolution kind of thing. But it's really not. She gets a couple episodes devoted to her realizing that something's up, and then, like, I think it was just a single episode of her overcoming this. Her friends had to help her, but in the end, she basically overcame the ultimate evil entirely on her own, and then got to keep the Shadow Staff and was even also better at it after the fact, despite the fact that she didn't have the ultimate evil's influence helping her anymore. Like, it was a fantastic episode for her character, showing how powerful she could be, but it just didn't make sense at the end of the day. It just didn't make sense that possession by the ultimate evil of the series, literally Morgan Le Fay, the rival of Merlin from the old King Arthur myths, could be shaken off as easily as it was. I expected Claire to be standing with the villains at the final fight of the season, the final fight of the series, rather, and for her to only break free of that control at the very last second, when she had no other choice but to break free or hurt one of her friends. It felt too pat, like they didn't have enough room to work it into the climax of the series, so they just didn't. And that brings me to actually my second problem with this season overall, and that's that they had way too much to wrap up by the climax. There were other smaller things that bugged me about this season too that I'm not really going to go into detail about, like Blinky's brother, for example. He was so evil the first time we saw him. He was gleefully evil, and yet in this season he gets a redemption arc. Like, he just kind of changes his mind because his allies were a little mean to him for a while. Like, that's a little pat too. It came out of nowhere and was resolved way too quickly and didn't really make sense, but I don't care because he became a superfluous character to the villains anyway. It didn't really matter anymore. But this is Claire we're talking about. She's one of the main three characters of this show. Human characters, at least, I guess. I would have expected the climax to her storyline to come with the climax of the show, and I just don't feel like it could have. Because just like Blinky's brother coming back around to Blinky's side couldn't have worked in the climax with everything else that they had going on, her story, the resolution to her story, couldn't have really worked there either, because they just had too much going on. And part of that is the fault of the writers. Like, you still got all the stuff with Gunmar going on. He's still technically the main villain of the series, so he's got to be dealt with in the climax. But now Morgana is becoming more and more active in events, so you know she's going to have to be dealt with too. And then Morgana even goes so far as to revive Angor, another villain who had already been dealt with. So now we have to deal with him again during the climax of this season. And then the plot of this particular season resurrects Merlin, so now we have his whole history with Morgana to resolve. in just this one season. And there's like all this drama and baggage that came along with that. And like, I get it, they only brought Merlin back so that he could do all this stuff that he did throughout the season to give the other characters the power boost that they would need to deal with these villains, as powerful as these villains are. But you could have fixed that by just not writing the villains to be as powerful, or writing a way for the characters to discover a weakness in your villains and defeat them. You didn't have to resurrect all this Merlin baggage too. Like, I'm not saying it was a bad idea to do that. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that doing that, choosing to do that, complicated the climax to your series. It bogged it down and didn't leave room for things to be resolved at the climax that should have been saved to be resolved at the climax. I have some suspicions that I cannot find confirmation for online anywhere. I have suspicions that there was supposed to be more to Trollhunters than just this season. And yes, I know there are going to be other Tales of Arcadia, but I mean specifically the Trollhunters section. I suspect that there was supposed to be more to this. Either another season, or maybe like a Netflix original movie, or something that they were already working on with the cast back when Anton Yelchin, the voice of Jim, tragically passed away. I cannot find confirmation for this anywhere online, but I do have a strong suspicion that this is how things were supposed to go. That the season was supposed to end with the defeat of Gunmar, or maybe the pushing back of Gunmar from the human world, or something along those lines. And then after that, there was supposed to be something more where the rest of this was tied up, where all the rest of the loose ends were tied up. Because the first half of the season just seems so rushed. Plot lines that were built up just resolve so quickly. It feels compressed. And then the second half of the season almost feels like a completely different season of television, like it's telling a completely different story. Almost as if you have enough story here for 2 seasons, they're just compressed down into one. It's just so messy that I can't imagine it not being the case. Which brings me to what I feel is probably the messiest part of this entire season. And that's Jim's final heroic sacrifice. Like, I get the point of this particular plot point. It really does hammer home that your hero is a hero when they make a big sacrifice for their heroic duties. But this particular sacrifice, it just doesn't make sense. Due to some of the events of last season, the main characters eventually find Merlin's tomb and effectively end up resurrecting him from the dead. He wasn't actually dead, it turns out. He was just kind of in a deep sleep, but that doesn't really matter. He's basically back from the dead now. And he's effectively living out of Jim's garage. And he's this cantankerous old man. He's mean to everybody. He's rude to everybody. He doesn't trust or believe in anybody. And that's fine. The old man mentor who's kind of a jerk is a thing in fiction. But Merlin himself in this show ends up being a terrible character. The wizened old jerk, he's supposed to be wise and a jerk. Merlin is just a jerk. Like, there are moments of wisdom that shine through, but they're always just the absolute worst. Like, he is just constantly pointing out all of the reasons why Jim is just the absolute worst hero. Which would be fine. Maybe Jim isn't suited to be the hero that they need right now. That would be an interesting plot to develop. But the show tries to develop this plot without realizing that it was Merlin who chose Jim in the first place. Merlin, through his amulet, chose Jim to be the hero right now that they need right now. Having Merlin himself come along and claim that that's not true doesn't make sense. Merlin himself is just a dick. He walks around so sure of himself, so sure that everything that he says is absolutely right all the time, but it's not. A major aspect of the climax of this series is proving that it's not. When he goes to confront Morgana and everything that he knew about how the fight was supposed to go down, everything that he understood about how the fight was supposed to go down, doesn't turn out that way. He had it in his mind that at some point all of his powers, all of the power that he had used to imprison Morgana in the first place, would be returned to him and he could just curb stomp her. But he was completely wrong. He's a character who is supposed to be able to see the future without fail. That's like a thing of Merlin's in the myth. And yet he screws up so badly that Morgana almost kills him and is now basically twice as strong as she's supposed to be. So immediately after I see that, I'm questioning literally everything that this guy said with any amount of certainty throughout his entire time on the show. Which is really unfortunate because one of the things that he said with absolute certainty is that Jim had to turn into a troll. Yeah, they say half troll, but he's not. Strickland is more half troll than what Jim ends up being. At least he and the other, what are they called, changelings or whatever, they can go out in the daytime like a human can. They can turn back and forth. Jim was just a troll with human memories. His troll form ended up looking in many ways like his human form, but there are very humanoid-looking trolls. That's not a weird thing. And I think it was Merlin, it may have been one of the other characters, but I think it was Merlin, said something about how he would be a troll with a human heart, but That doesn't make sense either. We have never seen a single troll in this series who wasn't capable of the same range of emotions as a human. And if that's not what he meant by human heart, then what did he mean? Was he talking about Jim's memories? Because Jim had those anyway. Like, I get it. Jim became much stronger when he became a troll. He was able to fight on more even grounds with Gunmar. But I'm not convinced that he couldn't have fought Gunmar as a human. The final fight against Gunmar happened in Jim's hometown. If he hadn't had to spend all that time training to use his new troll powers, couldn't he have spent that time instead, I don't know, setting traps for Gunmar or strategizing to use the home field advantage against his enemies? The kind of stuff that human Jim has been doing the entire series? Because once again, it was Merlin's own amulet that chose Jim, a human, to be the troll hunter right now for this final confrontation. Why is it suddenly such a big deal that Jim is no longer human? Why can Jim no longer be a human and still succeed at this? It doesn't make sense from a perspective of the lore of the series. And the fact that Merlin is shown to be wrong about so much stuff later, it has me questioning whether or not he was right about this. Like Jim, as supposedly a half-human troll, can't even walk in the sunlight. I want to say that again. As a half-human troll, he can't even walk in the sunlight. There is nothing human about him except for his past experiences. And what's worse is Merlin claims that there's no way to turn him back into a human. And I call bullshit on that. First of all, from a story point, because Jim, the hero of this series, who has made sacrifices in the past, just not on this scale. He deserves to, once he has saved the world from the ultimate evil, step out into the sun and feel its warmth on his skin. This is just one of the least fair plot developments I've ever seen in fiction. Ever. Especially when I am left questioning whether or not it was necessary in the first place. But I also call bullshit on this from a lore perspective. How is it not possible to turn him back into a human? We have seen trolls turned into humans. It was a major plot point for multiple episodes. Blinky turned into a human, and it was a big deal because he could go out into the sun, and they were worried that he would turn back while he was out in the sun, and it would kill him. So why, first of all, is turning a human into a troll so difficult that you would need all these crazy ingredients that they had to gather in the first place, when turning a troll into a human can be done accidentally? And if turning a troll into a human can be done accidentally, why can't you turn him back with a proper spell? You're frickin' Merlin. Just have him go out and gather the counter ingredients for the last potion you made. If it doesn't work like that, then why? Tell us why. In a series where we've already seen a troll turned into a human as a major plot point, tell us why it can't be done again. Even if troll has to be Jim's base form or whatever after this, whatever, that's fine. But he should be able to turn back into a human, at least for periods of time. That is a thing that this series has shown us is possible in this world, so you have to explain to us why it's not possible now. Like, this plot point was so ridiculous that when I first heard it, I laughed out loud. When Merlin first said that he was going to turn Jim into a troll permanently, I thought it was a joke. Not just because of the stuff with the amulet, not just because it's stupid from a character development perspective, but because there's no reason why that would be true. There's no reason why turning someone from one species into another would be more difficult going one way or the other. It just doesn't make sense. Like, I honestly thought that it was going to be revealed at the end that this was all just a test by Merlin, that he had been a dick to Jim up to this point and put him through all this stuff to prove that he was actually the hero that they needed in this moment. Maybe not even for Merlin, but for Jim himself, who was kind of doubting himself, because that's just the thing that Jim does. But it turned out to be entirely serious, and it was just so dumb that it almost ruined the entire season for me. But AJ, doesn't Merlin showing up and telling Jim how much of a failure he is and pointing out all of his faults only for Jim to rise up and win anyway make a powerful statement? Even if Jim had to change something about himself in order to do so? Why yes, person who is definitely not me wearing a different hat, it does, but wouldn't it make a much more powerful statement if Jim had insisted on doing things his own way and still succeeded, despite everything that Merlin said? Because I certainly think that it would have. Granted, seeing Troll Jim jumping and flipping around and fighting entire armies of Gunmar's dudes and fighting Gunmar toe-to-toe and fighting Gunmar and Angorot at once, that was all super cool. But again, I'm not convinced that Jim couldn't have done that in a less direct way as a human. Nothing in the series has shown me that he couldn't have done that in a less direct way as a human. And, I mean, doesn't this go against the entire theme of the show, which was that Jim is good enough exactly as he is, that he's a hero exactly as he is, that it's his humanity that makes him a hero in the first place in so many ways? Like, they make a point of reminding us multiple times that even as a troll, he still has his humanity because he still has his human experiences. And he even, in a kind of lame and anticlimactic way, even uses that to save everyone in the end by turning Angorot against the other enemies, by reminding Angorot that he used to be a good person. But all that ends up doing is reaffirming for me that it's his humanity that he needed, that this whole troll transformation thing was ultimately unnecessary, that it was another mistake that Merlin made, and now Jim has to suffer with it for the rest of his existence. The ending makes it seem like he's over it, like it doesn't bother him anymore, and Claire has made it clear that she still loves him one way or the other, which is great. Claire is just fantastic that way. But this still, it annoys me. It ends up annoying me. And I think what annoys me about it the most, now that I've actually gotten talking about it, is that if it had just been explained better, or shown better in the climax, that this was absolutely necessary. If we had just been given a reason why he couldn't turn back after the fact. Something more than Merlin just saying that it's true. It wouldn't have bothered me so much. I might have even come to think of it as Jim's crowning moment of heroism. But because it has so much baggage attached to it that just doesn't make sense, that never happens. And it detracts from the season for me. I also feel compelled to talk about very briefly the sort of backdoor pilot episode that was included in this season. I say sort of because it wasn't really a pilot. The show that it was piloting is being made. It's already a confirmed thing. It was less a pilot to like a network and more a pilot to us, the audience. An advertisement for this upcoming show, the second Tales of Arcadia, the name of which I do not remember. You can probably Google it though. At the end of Trollhunters, Jim and his group, they kind of move on. At least the majority of them are no longer going to be in town anymore. But there is going to be another Tales of Arcadia set in the same town, which will focus on two siblings who are introduced in this season of Trollhunters for, I think it was just one episode that focused on them. They may have been in other episodes, but I think it was just the one that really focused on them. And spoiler alert, they're aliens, as in like from outer space, aliens. And I didn't hate them or anything, like, don't get me wrong, they weren't like super annoying. I didn't dread their time on the show, and thankfully, unlike some backdoor pilots I can think of, they didn't entirely steal the show away from our heroes. Our heroes still had a lot to do when they were on screen. But I've never been so indifferent to two characters who were spawned by a franchise that I really love. I didn't hate them, but I didn't really like them either. They were just kind of there, and after having watched them in this episode that focused on them this season, like, I was already teetering on the edge regarding whether or not I was going to watch their show in the first place, and now, unfortunately, I know that I'm not. I won't like it. At least based on the taste of things that I got from that episode, I'm not going to like it. Like, I'll still give it a chance, but I don't think it's going to be for me, and that's a real shame. If you really liked them and you think their show is going to be fantastic, then more power to you. It's just, it doesn't seem like it's going to be for me. Overall, Trollhunters Season 3, the final season of what overall was a really good show, was too messy for me to call it great. I wanted to call this season great. I wanted to absolutely love it. And while I liked it, while I enjoyed my time watching it, like at this point you guys should know that even bitching about plot holes is something that I enjoy doing. Even though I enjoyed my time watching it, it wasn't what I had hoped it would be. It's way messier than I feel like it needed to be. There are certainly fantastic moments in this season. The animation is still great. The characters are still likable. I still enjoy following their adventures. The action is pretty fantastic, but there are definitely some things that weigh it down. I think what's going to eventually determine whether or not you like this season of the show, if you haven't watched it yet, is going to be whether or not you are able to accept the transformation of Jim better than I did. I think it's going to come down to whether or not the problems inherent to that plotline bother you as much as they bothered me. If they don't bother you, you'll probably end up really loving this season. I guess more so than ever, I'm saying that if you are a fan of this show, if you already know that you like it, but you haven't watched this season yet, don't take my review as gospel and go watch it for yourself. Again, can't stress this enough. I didn't hate it. I'm still super glad that I watched it. I'm still super glad that we did get this final season and that it did wrap the things up that it did as well as it did. I just feel like it could have been better and should have been better, and that is going to bother me probably for the rest of my life because I don't let things go. All of that said, though, guys, what did you think of this season of Trollhunters? If you have seen it, let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord, link in the description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.